Well, salam, peace, and shalom to all my dear beloved friends, and welcome back to our Interfaith Explorations today, co hosted by the Interfaith Center and the Cobb Institute in California. So, I was thinking about Letter of the Day, which is J for Justice, and I was reminded of a story in which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he learns about an incident from Abyssinia in which an older woman was pushed and she got hurt. And he said that how would God sanctify a nation that does not protect its weak and underprivileged from its powerful ones? So, looking at this story, it tells us that prosperity and well being of an entire nation is at stake when its members fail to protect those who are weak from those who are in power. So, in many ways, my faith has been the source or the inspiration to do social justice work for me. And actually, justice is one of the central themes in our holy book, Quran. And I believe all the prophets were sent to the world just to establish justice and to remove injustices. And it's not only particular to Islam, all the different religions, including Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Baha'ism, they all have strong and rich social justice traditions. The more I'm learning about Judaism, I'm seeing what a strong tradition they have of justice rooted in the spiritual practice. So as we start the class today, please remember that our classes are recorded. They're available on YouTube, so keep yourselves muted. We will be talking about justice, J for justice today. Along with me is Jay, my colleague and co-teacher, and he will be introducing our special guest of the day, which is Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson. And Beth is a Unitarian minister, and we are very happy to have you here today, Beth, because we have not had a Unitarian speaker yet. So welcome to our class.
Johnson is with us today. And I've known Beth for 20 years. And I met her at the seminary that I went to and she went to. It's a Methodist seminary. It's in Southern California. It's called Claremont School of Theology. Beth was in seminary as a Unitarian. I was in seminary as a Methodist Christian. What I immediately appreciated about Beth was that she was so open. And I teach the world's religions, so I'm interested in all the practices and ideas of the world's religions. And Beth was equally open. And we shared a love, an appreciation of a tradition called kirtan. And kirtan is a form of chanting that I think it comes from the Sikh tradition. Is that right, Beth?
Many traditions have used kirtan, and our Sikh brothers and sisters do, but mine was from the Hindu tradition.
From Hinduism, yeah. Also, one thing I really appreciated about Beth early on was that she loved animals. I think you're a cat person. Are you a dog person too?
I am. I have cats, or I am had by cats, but I have an affinity and a commitment to all other animals.
Yeah.
Yep.
So whatever's a sentient being,
Yes.
she has an affinity for it, and I do too. When I talked to Beth, when I asked Beth to come, I wanted her to do O for openness, because we hadn't done O for openness yet. But then I quickly discovered in conversation with her that she was open in a way that I think really challenges me. And that is to be open to the perspective and experience of the marginalized and the outcast and the forsaken and the forgotten. And not just open in a way that wants political equality or economic equality, as important as that is, but open in a way where you take on their perspective, or at least you honor their perspective. and let it relativize your own. And so for my part, Beth, and I don't know about you, I would distinguish easy justice from hard justice.
All
And
justice should be hard.
yeah.
And sometimes it's not when it's shallow.
So what I hope that Beth can take us into today is hard justice, not shallow justice. By the way, I have dogs. And can you hear them? They're barking.
Yes.
They will stop soon.
That's okay. All voices are welcome in this space.
Okay. So I'm going to interview Beth in a way. Beth is a Unitarian minister. She's been a minister there for how many years in San Diego County?
Yes, I'm in Vista, which is North San Diego County. That is, we are 35 miles north of the city of San Diego, and I am 50 miles north of the San Diego-Tijuana border, which makes us also a border community. And we can talk some about that work.
We want to hear about it.
16 years. We're in our 16th, we're completing our 16th year. Oh my goodness.
And Beth, you are a member of so many justice organizations. I'm not going to read them out, but you really are so involved. I would like to begin, Beth. I'd like to hear where you came from. Where you came from and how you became a Unitarian, even apart from justice concerns. Can you say a word about that? Can you take us to the early Beth?
I can. I'll kind of give you the Reader's Digest version. So I was raised Catholic on the northwest side of Chicago. I went to a Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school. I have a vague recollection of the pre-Vatican II Latin Mass. Yes, I am that old. And for those of you who don't know or may not remember, up until Vatican II Ecumenical Council, Mass was said with the priest back to the congregation. And then the radical move was that the altar was turned. And so the priest faced the congregation. So what I remember very, very early on, because I was very, very young, I might say, was this sense of mystery, this sense of the holy in that place. And then the tables turned, if you will, and I remember feeling as a child the innerness of God. Even before I could take communion, which I could take at 7, there was a sense of God being inside me and God being in that space. Of course, we were in school when those Vatican II innovations came, and so the nuns changed their habits, and I found out they actually had hair, and one of them had. So it was a Catholic grammar school. So I actually basically started arguing doctrine in about the 5th grade. Transubstantiation was actually the one that got me into a little bit of trouble. I continued, went through grammar school, entered Notre Dame High School for girls. And it was there that I continued to be curious, question. I started qualifying for 12-step recovery at that time. So I had, I was taking my detours, but it was there that I really saw the link between social justice and religion. It was there that I was taught to think critically about my claims. If I was pro-choice and against the death penalty, I had to articulate why. And so really, even in the fogginess of of my own using during that time, I still, got that critical thinking. And I'm sure a couple of my nuns were liberation theologians. I could tell they were bringing this radical edge to history, to government. So that was kind of a little peak, a little bit of an opening. After high school, I tried a couple of college courses, ended up working in business for a while. And part of my journey is having gotten into recovery, 12-step recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, when I was 24 years old. So that was my spiritual path for a very long time. It was that kind of the idea, the notion of a higher power. I had left off Catholicism. Doctrinally, it was no longer a fit. I found it oppressive. And one of the things that I knew, by the way, when I was a small child, feeling the innerness of God, watching the priests do the Mass, is that I could never be a priest. And I never actually really wanted to be a nun. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to be the one mitigating, channeling, bringing the holy to people. And I knew that was closed off to me. So I had a very lovely, profound, kind of a spirituality with more of an Eastern bent, if you will. During high school, I read Ram Dass, for those of you who know Ram Dass, and Alan Watts, and became interested in the intersection of Eastern spirituality and Western psychology and Western spirituality. And so that kind of just followed me through. And I eventually found my way early on in recovery. I had a brief encounter with the Assemblies of God. Now you might say, how did that happen? First of all, my first sponsor in AA was a charismatic Catholic. And does everyone know what I mean by that? Do we think? Okay.
What that mean? What, Sophia, do you know what that means, Sophia?
Repeat, Jay, repeat. What is your question?
Well, she said her first sponsor in AA was a charismatic Catholic. Do you know what that means?
I do not know what that means.
Okay, not
And
everybody
Dan
knows.
doesn't know what that means. So remember it, and we have Jewish friends here as well. So remember that's Christian language.
That's Christian language.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, charismatic works, but charismatic plus Catholic is complicated for me. Okay.
Well, it's part of the charismatic renewal, actually. So for those who don't know, charismatic Catholics are folks who experience the full gifts of the Holy Spirit, include being baptized in the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, prophecy, really a robust embodied spirituality. Do you think that says it, Jay? How else would
Well, this is kind of curious to me. How many of you know what speaking in tongues is? Meg knows that. Sheila knows that. Nita knows that. So I think if you say ecstatic worship,
that's it.
Ecstatic worship.
That's it.
And so you
That's
had a priest,
really it.
you had a priest that was in the ecstatic worship tradition, which is kind of unique.
It was actually my sponsor. It was a woman. But I think that's really, Jay, and that's often the word that I use to describe it, is ecstatic. No matter, because people get all kind of hung up on, what the actual practice is. It's really embodied and it's ecstatic, and it's understanding that the holy is within you. However, doctrinally, that didn't fit for me. That was repressive. That was, it was a brief time that I was in that. And I sometimes leave that part of the journey out because it seems so incongruous. And but the reason why I include it here is because throughout my journey, there was a sense of the innerness of the holy, an embodied sense of the holy in my life, and an ecstatic sense of oneness with all that is. And that's really what that very brief time was about. But of course, just the doctrine of all of that just didn't fit. And so I returned kind of to that, back to that 12-step Eastern kind of spirituality, and found my way to a more earth-centered path where I really felt my connection with the rest of nature and with other animals. I can't talk about my spiritual journey without talking about my connection with other animals and the rest of nature. One of the things that I didn't have language for before, but eventually did, is the language of interconnectedness. The notion that I am not separate from you, who are all in little squares, but I prefer to think of you as a beautiful quilt. I'm not separate from the rest of nature. I'm not separate from other animals. That I am deeply interconnected, interdependent, and implicated in all that goes on in the rest of nature. So that was just a thread that, from even the time when I was a little girl in Chicago, in my upstairs bedroom, where there was a maple tree, that I would watch it go through the cycles and the seasons, and could feel that excitement when the little tiny buds would burst through when spring was finally going to arrive. And those experiences and intuitions really came together when I started following a path that was explicitly earth-centered. And it was during that time that I found references to Unitarian Universalism. I had found my way. My first career was as a drug and alcohol counselor. So I'm a certified drug and alcohol counselor. My degree is in psychology. So I worked for 20 years in that field. And I had my orientation was more social work, more social service kind of orientation, kind of helping individuals, and which was a wonderful, wonderful place for me to be. And then I noticed and could see in my patients the disparities between my patients of color, my patients who were poor. I worked with women in poverty, and I worked with also adolescents. I worked in juvenile hall in Chicago, and saw the kind of opportunities that some people had for recovery and other people didn't. And so my analysis of interlocking systems of domination and oppression was honed. What I realized was that my earth-centered path and my justice and feminist sensibilities could be found in ecofeminism. So I really deepened into an ecofeminist spirituality analysis that says everything is connected. All these oppressions are interlocking. And you can't separate one. You can't talk about poverty without talking about race, can't talk about gender oppression without talking about racial oppression, certainly can't talk about any of it without talking about economic injustice. And for me, also recognizing the relationship that humans have with other animals that oppress, harm, and oppress them, and seeing the linkage between women and animals and the oppression of both. So you see, these threads all came together. Brought them to my undergrad, but then really got honed. And as I mentioned when we were gathering, I had two professors who were Unitarian Universalists. They were a couple. And I was really impressed with their analysis, with their openness, with what they taught and how they taught. And at the same time, I'm having these other interactions with Unitarian Universalists and wondering, who are these people? For one class, I wanted to interview someone from a social movement of the 1930s. And there was a Unitarian retirement community in LA called Sunset Hall. And I got an interview with one of the folks. And so I went over for lunch. And I discovered that I was just at that point hanging around with a bunch of old socialists. And I'm like, this could be a home. And I had an intuition when I was in meditation about what I wanted to do for graduate school. And I heard a voice, and I'm sometimes suspicious when I hear the voice because it sounds a lot like mine. But it said, you could be a Unitarian Universalist minister. I had never set foot in a Unitarian Universalist church. And then I mentioned to folks on the call earlier, I was talking to my 2 professors, and they invited me into Unitarian Universalist ministry. And that was in the mid-90s. And it was, that started my journey to Unitarian Universalist ministry. I was truly called to ministry prior to setting foot into one of the congregations. And I felt called to ministry my whole life. From the time I was a little girl to the time that I facilitated rituals as a priestess, I was always called to some sort of personal and public ministry. So that's how I found my way to Unitarian.
Well, thank you so much. And just a brief aside, and very brief, but when I think of AA, I think of it as a kind of community that is really nourished. So many people, and I just want to thank you for mentioning that part of your journey.
Yeah.
And encourage all of us both to honor that side of your life and also think about how when we look for models of community where people hold one another accountable at the same time that they care for each other, AA does a good job of that. Okay, let's move on.
Let me say this.
Okay.
Everything I have, everything I am, everything that I've accomplished in my life, I've accomplished because I stepped into those rooms and I made a commitment. I would not be here. Believe me, beloved, I would not be talking to you. 42 years ago, I began to live my life. So thank you.
Well, way to go.
Thank you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Now let's turn to justice. I'm looking at the clock here, and it's about 12. Now where I am, it's about 12:25, 10:25 where you are, a little later. And we want to just go for about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
And then we want to open it up.
Okay.
So take us right smack dab into the middle of your justice ministry right now.
Oh, right now.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I am one of the California co-chairs for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Nita and I were just talking about the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, who's one of the co-chairs. And I have been involved in the campaign since the beginning, since 2017, when we had our launch in Washington, D.C. And we launched in May of 2018, 40 days of nonviolent moral direct action in over 40 state capitals in Washington, D.C. I'm one of the trainers for nonviolent moral direct action. So I'm involved in the Poor People's Campaign on a national level through my denomination. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Unitarian Universalist Association and Poor People's Campaign Leadership Council. I'm involved in my community as one of the coordinators for the Poor People's Campaign in San Diego County. I am the faith coordinator for the faith working group of the California Poor People's Campaign. I serve on several boards. One of my the areas that I've worked in is immigration and worker justice. So I'm on the board of URISE, the Unitarian Universalist Refugee and Immigrant Services and Education. I serve on the board of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium as well, and I convene a coalition for Earth Justice. So that's some of the work I'm doing right now in my community. The way that so that's where I'm at right now. I don't know where you want me to go with that.
I want you to tell us the story, more like stories of your involvement in the people that you're really working with and what your aspirations are at large for our society or for California for that matter.
Yeah. I want to say just a little bit, if it isn't clear, that I love what Sophia wrote in your email to me, Sophia, justice as a spiritual practice. So my work for justice in justice work comes out of that deep sense of interdependence. And Jay, when you talked about the feeling with, that's my motivation. Truly, it is. So some of the work that we've done here in San Diego that I've been really happy to be part of is partnering with the American Friends Service Committee for a Love Knows No Border action at the San Diego-Tijuana border, where we brought in faith leaders and denominational leaders and communities from around the country in San Diego, 500 strong, going to the border and participating in civil disobedience, lifting up the issues that obtain here in San Diego County. We still have, obviously, the conditions in the detention centers are horrible. We have people infected with COVID, dying of COVID in our detention centers. So some of the work that we do is to really advocate for people to be safe and to no longer be detained. As a denomination in Unitarian Universalism, we have several resolutions that we're working on right now, some of which is abolition, defunding the police and reallocating funds so that Black people no longer have to be killed by the police when they have mental health issues or because they're jaywalking or walking down the street. So that's some of the racial justice work that we're doing here in San Diego as well. I spent many, many years as on the board of the Interfaith Committee for Worker Justice, Center for Worker Justice. And that's where my heart really, really opened in working with workers who we are right now. What I was doing before I joined you was watching a Walkout Wednesday that was sponsored by SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. I've been involved in the Fight for 15 since its inception. And so that's some of what we're advocating for is $15 an hour in a union. I have heard over the years the stories of people who are working a full-time job, they're fast food workers, and they're living in their cars. We did civil disobedience here in San Diego back with the Fight for 15, and I was in jail with a woman who'd been working for 15 years in fast food. And even the officer who was talking to us while we were in a holding, the assumption is that people who are working in fast food, they're just there for, it's a transitional job, it's for students, and that's not true. Right now, what we're working on in the Poor People's Campaign, as you know, the campaign talks about systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narrative of white Christian nationalism. So I'll work on all the intersection of all of these things in my community. And this is what we know. We know that we have workers that we call essential, but they can't take care of themselves by even buying the essentials for themselves. They're not in line for the vaccine. So partly what we're working on, what I'm working on with the Poor People's Campaign is our 14 policy priorities that I'm happy to share more about. So on the ground, this is about working to empower communities, walking alongside communities. And I heard an expression the other day in a meeting where someone talked about underestimated communities instead of marginalized communities, because marginalized is the perspective of the dominant culture. And I heard civil rights leader Ruby Sales talk about that as well from an economic perspective. If you're marginalized economically, that's because of the capitalist system that we live in. So I like underestimated, and I don't know where it started, but I will kind of offer that for you. So that's some of the on the ground work that we're doing. We're working on houselessness. In San Diego County, we have a large population. Of course, we're in San Diego, of houseless folks. So I could go on, but that's where I'm at.
So how has this, you're white,
I am white. Oh,
and I know that in an earlier conversation, how has this affected you as a white woman? I think I just want to put it that way. And how do you try to, if at all, transcend or acknowledge or whatever a position of privilege? Can you guide us in that? Can you guide us in that?
I'm so glad for that question, because what I didn't talk about, I realized, is the work that I'm doing that we're doing in our congregation. Unitarian Universalism is a predominantly white denomination, but we are not by any stretch of the imagination all white. One of the things that we as Unitarian Universalists have made a commitment to do is dismantling white supremacy and systems of oppression in ourselves and in our institutions. In my own congregation, we have been doing intentional anti-racism work for years. I would say a turning point for me was the murder of Trayvon Martin. Now, I'd always talked about economic justice and racial justice and linking them together, but Trayvon Martin for me and my congregation was a turning point. And that meant working on and understanding my own white privilege, my own white fragility. And I will tell you this, it is an ongoing journey. One of the ways that we do that in my congregation and in our denomination, in Unitarian Universalism, we have an organization called Allies for Racial Equity, where white people get to go and do their work and figure out their whiteness and how we benefited from whiteness, what reparations look like. Of course, in my congregation, we have a poor people of color's space, so they don't have to do the labor for us white people. We have a regular anti-racism trainings. I probably have 170 members in my congregation, and about 90 of them have been through some sort of anti-racism training. So for me, to decenter my whiteness means that I look as a worship leader as well, because I am a pastor too. I'm not just an activist in the community. To look at centering voices of color in our readings, in the way that we do worship, in the choices that we make. So it's constantly being aware of how I decenter myself. And that includes in the racial justice spaces that I am. Often I am one of either the only or one of a few white people in the space. And I've learned to step back and realize that I am not the voice for other people. I'm here to amplify other voices. And so working on that gives me the opportunity to really, Jay, and all, when I think, I don't think I've ever arrived. You know, I'm not like the wokest of the woke, but the more I do the work, particularly right now, I'm doing a lot with somatics and embodiment and trauma, and realizing how deep and how pervasive and how long a road it is going to be, and that we will not get there until this country recognizes its racial wound, founded in genocide, drenched in blood, until we reconcile and come to terms with that. And I have no interest in people talking about the problem being division in our country. The problem is systemic racism and the oppression of Native Indigenous peoples. You know what? I should have started by acknowledging that I am on the stolen land of the Luiseño Nation and the Kumeyaay Nation. That's part of the way that we in our denomination and in our congregation recognize that we continue to be embedded in systems of oppression and white privilege.
So let's stop here and let's open things up.
Okay.
And I want to remind myself that I'm very familiar with thinking of spirituality as having something to do with finding internal comfort.
Oh yeah, right.
Peace of mind, consolation, equating spirituality with a sense of at homeness. But I think that your spirituality involves not at homeness. A spirituality of justice involves not being satisfied with the way things are, in a kind of discomfort. And I just hope our group can sometime talk about that. That if J is for justice, it may involve what you might call healthy alienation, healthy discomfort. And then acting upon
and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. That's yeah. Okay, so let's open it up. Who would like to get started? Go ahead. Or Arnita, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Wow, powerful. At the beginning, you said you really wanted to make a distinction between hard justice and shallow justice. Speak to that, please.
Well, I wouldn't even call shallow justice justice, but it's that difference, Nita, between equality and equity. Have you seen the it's a really popular meme. It's there's a fence and there's kids of different colors wanting to look over the fence, like at a baseball game or something. And everybody's got the same stool so that smaller kids can't see over the fence. So then the next picture is stools of different sizes so everybody could look over. Then the correction to that is the fence is down. If that's my little illustration of that. We can't quote Dr. King, I have a dream, without quoting Dr. King's deep critique of economics and capitalism and the intersections between them.
Next comment or thought or reflection. It's open for everybody. Dan?
Beth, I really appreciate the strong stance you're taking to take responsibility for white supremacy. I saw a Facebook posting yesterday that said white supremacy is not a problem for Black people to solve, it's a problem for white people to solve. It's not a problem for white people to feel pity toward Black people, it's a problem for white people to take action on. And so I put a posting at the bottom. I'm looking for other white males who are willing to join with me in dialoguing on this issue, because I believe we have that responsibility.
How about an amen for you?
Well, I haven't gotten a single response.
I would direct you to a white anti-racist activist named Chris Crass. And I'll put his name in the chat. Mm-hmm. His name is Chris Crass. His work is amazing. He does work with white men. Mm-hmm. He's right now he's creating, he has a journey group for white male clergy. So Chris Crass, you're not alone, brother, because you're right. We can't, it's not Black people's or people of color's problem. It's ours.
Right. So I'm interested in knowing, I have this sense that there are allies, and then there are people who do not believe that they are racists, but they engage in unaware racist behavior. And then there are those who are just blatant bigots.
Flat out.
And I don't think there's going to be much success in working with the hardcore. So I think the area where there's most improvement is with those white folks who are, as you say, aren't yet awoke.
Yeah.
But white fragility sets in, and it's very difficult to engage conversation with folks who want to deny their racism. So I'd be interested in your reflection, because I think the confabulation is people hear a criticism about their racial behavior and they take it in as if it's an attack on their character.
Right.
And it causes them to not be open to exploring the possibility of their behavior. So how are you finding ways to engage with white people to help them wake up?
I put the name of a book in the chat, Living in the Tension. And it's by a white anti-racist, and I want to make sure I get the spelling of her last name. Her name is Shelley Tuckluck. I'm going to go ahead, Tuckluck. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat. You know, this is what we know. You brought up, wow, you have a lot there. So let me put this link in there. And we've had a study group with her work twice, like 25 people in it each time. This is what we know. You know, you can't sit around the dinner table saying to your, brother-in-law, you're a racist. That doesn't help unless there's harm being done. So what Tuckluck does in her book and with her study guide is talks about how we live in the tension between the both and have conversations with people where it's appropriate and possible to ask questions, to be curious, and to open up a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
All bets are off then if someone's causing harm. Then you confront that harm right there, right? So that's one thing. That's one way to help us all on our journey toward what we call in Unitarian Universalism, we call it journeying towards spiritual wholeness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it really is. So there's that. So you're bringing up the idea that there's individualized racism, like the person, we tend to think of racism as, your bigoted brother-in-law. I don't know if anybody has a brother-in-law like that. I happen to. And then but we're still all embedded in the racist system. So it's a both and there too, where possible, you have conversations and you're curious, and then we must work systemically as well, right? To our biggest task right now is ending voter suppression. That's our biggest task nationally, is to make sure that the gerrymandering and the shenanigans that they're trying to pull right now can't happen. Because we know an empowered electorate is an electorate that will choose, it's the people who've been kept away from the polls. So it's a both and, Dan. It's the individual and it's also the systemic. And I think you're right. I think it's hard to reach people who are quote hardcore. But so I hope that's helpful.
It is. And before I relinquish the microphone, I do believe things have to be lightened up from time to time. So I have a bumper sticker I saw that you would appreciate given your earlier conversation about your journey. Mm-hmm. And the bumper sticker was, my karma ran over your dogma.
Yeah, I've seen that. Now, I want to say, if I may, a word about joy. I remember like some years ago, we my district was kind of hosting or met a Unitarian minister. Because remember, we're Unitarian Universalists. Let's not lose the Universalists, because I'm a Universalist. Actually, as a little aside, someone finally told me I'm a Universalist of the third person of the Trinity, meaning I have not left off my ecstatic worship and connection with oneness and with the Holy One. So the holiness all around us. And we were talking about our justice work, and he was from Transylvania. He said, "Oh my God, how do you live?" It's so intense. And I couldn't do the work that I do without having the deepest sense of joy and spiritual grounding. And it's joy, a deep abiding joy, as opposed to joy as happiness. So someone has a question, Jay. Melanie.
Yes.
Melanie.
I want to applaud you for addressing holistically about justice and the various intersections of justice. I have found, whether it be church, temples, synagogues, we talk about justice, but we don't talk about the hard work and the intentionality that is required. Many people, I kind of believe what Austin Channing Browning says, that we're not going to hug our way to justice. Many people want to believe that we can just hug, shake hands, or share coffee and all will be well. But the pursuit of justice requires hard conversation. One of the words you used, intentionality. And I find that many white people are uncomfortable, one, talking about it in terms of their whiteness and knowing the difference between being anti-racist and not a racist, the action part of it, or they give up, or people are passionately wanting to, but don't have direction as to finding the resources. That's what Dan brought up, was so effective in his comments and questions. There are many sources out there, more of these resources get started and then they become dormant. Be the Bridge has a whiteness 101. And sometimes the language makes people reticent. Fragility, for example, at my church made people reticent, uncomfortable, because we're speaking now in languages since we have seen killing up front and personal on our TVs or social media about Black and brown and the oppression and suppression, or walking and talking while Black and killed, and people not really understanding that. And that's why I'm always hesitant to say something on interfaith, but I seek interfaith because I want to see how churches and mosques and synagogues and etc. understand that for so long we've been complicit by silence. We've been complicit by non-action. When we think of those that are oppressed and marginalized, we often think about poor, but we don't think about this this country has some real problems when it comes to race. So the pursuit of justice requires not only hard conversation, but creative imagining. It requires digging into the work passionately and relentlessly.
Yes.
And it's not a one-time thing. It is ongoing. And that's why I seek interfaith, because I think the labels that we're confined by, I'm United Methodist or I am this, is not enough. Spirituality, if you really have love for the human race, it goes beyond those confines and constructs of what we have created, and learning each other's histories, deep histories. Black and brown didn't ask to be oppressed.
Right.
They don't want to be oppressed. They want to know that they have white allies who are doing the work. And there are times It's important to do the conversation and share experiences, but that sometimes whites need to deal with their whiteness with other whites. And that's why there is a big movement toward white 101 or whiteness or helping people become comfortable with the language of what does social justice mean?
That's right.
What does it mean to have that intentional work? What do you mean I'm racist because I said, oh, let me touch your hair, it's different, or some of the other odd things people say that they don't see as wrong or bias and I don't want to take up any more time, but this resonates deep with me. And that's why I sought out Interfaith, because this is one of those times that I'm hearing someone who's a guest address the intentionality of social justice. And I've heard Dan and others speak to it, but I just had to get that out because this is what I'm seeking, being in Arkansas only 4 years, and I think this is the last year. Very important to be progressive in humanity.
Yes, amen.
Reclaiming our common humanity is a must if you have spiritualness in you of a higher power.
That's right.
I don't know how we can be complacent and call ourselves love God and not do enough to help our neighbor who's being killed.
Yep.
Or oppressed.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Jay, for taking too much time.
Oh, no, you take all
I have
the
been
time.
waiting for so long. This is, Howard Thurman, Jay, you asked me about liberation theology. That should cross sectors of denominations. All of us should be struggling with that.
That's right.
Every denomination should be struggling with how do I do the hard work of social justice?
Yep. Because there is nothing else to do now, Melanie. I mean, we're at the time of reckoning. We should have been reckoning all along, and like Dr. Barber has talked about, we had, we're in a third reconstruction and how are we going to make that happen? But we know, I mean, seeing George Floyd, killed in that way, which was horrifying, it did wake some people up to say, but then it is, I did a long summit on embodiment and social justice. And one of the ways that I do my work is to seek out the reading and the work of people of color and not just, have it all come through white people. And as I get steeped in this 5-day summit, the thing that happens for a lot of white people, myself included, is it's a long journey. And we can't just go, oh yeah, there's a problem and now we kind of move on. And like you say, all hug.
Yeah.
No. And I think it's a feeling of, oh, it's so big. How do I do it? And we do it one step at a time. We do it by doing that hard work of justice.
And if you saw George Floyd as your first, because it was so public to see his life taken away by a knee, just think how many before.
And that's it.
Yes. And it's a continuous process. So working on it one time.
That's right.
Again, it's an ongoing intentionality process. Right. Reading other authors, not just white authors, Black and brown and indigenous and others.
Yes.
Again, I don't want to take too much time, Jay. This is why I'm always hesitant to speak, because I have so much to say. And I'm looking for white allies, those who are willing to say, I'm going to be an anti-racist, not a non-racist. When I see racism, whether it be in my family, in my church, in whatever sphere it may be, I'm going to say, stop. No, that is not correct. That is not the way to behave. Why do you feel that way? Why are you using that language? Let me share, engage in dialogue. It doesn't have to be hurtful, but meaningful, deep conversations, beginning at home. Beginning with your spouse, beginning with your children, exposing them to other cultures and books and readings and histories that we don't get. You know, there was a big movement in Arkansas to eliminate diversity in schools, multicultural education, and I was blown away and certainly had my say about that. But there's a movement to, because there is a large majority of people, not necessarily in this group, I'm talking about in the country, who want to see that disappear because of fear of losing their wrong in society. That's why the book Caste is so phenomenal, because she puts it in terms, instead of race and racism, in caste and different rungs, different hierarchies, whether it be religion, socioeconomics, but in America, it is so real in racism. Thank you for allowing me to take your time, Jay, and as well.
Melanie, you didn't take my time. You gave us your time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right, Jay.
We would, if we could, we would extend this whole conversation another hour, but we can't.
Yeah.
We can't. Now, Al, I want to give Sophia a chance to say something and how things felt from your perspective, hearing this whole conversation. Al, can you make it quick? I see your hand up. Can you make it real quick? Unmute.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Okay. I just finished reading the book by Eddie Glaude, Begin Again, which I highly recommend. He wrestles with the contributions of James Baldwin, and Baldwin came to this conclusion, which I think is really important, saying that in trying to help Black people not seeing racism as their problem, or even saying it's a white problem, it's until whites begin to see how their lives are deprived by racism, we won't really begin to solve the problem. So it's not just about confronting racism, but about seeing how your own life is lessened by the fact that you do not have this kind of relationship with those who are different from yourself. That's it.
Thank you, Al. And I want to thank Beth. Beth, this can be part one of additional things in some context.
I'll come back.
I hope, and we'll work on that. I want Sophia to bring this to a close today, if you will, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Beth. We are at the end of our time, so I won't do my 10 minutes closing. No poem. Well, Beth, I do want to say thank you so much for highlighting all those identities that we carry within ourselves, like being a woman, being a white person, being a Catholic, you talked about it earlier, or a Unitarian, and how those inform and identify and strengthen our social justice work. I think that was really important for many of us to hear, because for me, social justice work is deeply rooted in spirituality. And for all of us in this group, because we are all spiritual seekers. So I want to share one thing. The Muslim mystics say that love is like an ocean which comes from God. And then it gushes through us, it travels through us, and it pours through us. And when it pours out of our heart into the public sphere, we recognize that love as justice. Yes. And that's the same thing which was said by Dr. King and Ella Baker during the civil rights movement, that all that we mean by justice is love when it comes to public sphere. So I want to close by just, I think we had a lot of good thoughts that were shared today. And I want to just all of you to reflect upon some of the ways we practice justice in our own lives. I personally do organize protests, marches, vigils. Many of us in the group probably sign petitions. We do political action work. We do community service projects. We give to philanthropic causes through socially responsible giving. We carry so many different banners in our lifetime, the slogans that we wear, the buttons that we put on our bags, the t-shirts that we wear, the bumper sticker that Dan has on his car. And all of that is important, but maybe after today's class, we all can take some time to sit and reflect on all those things that we do as expressions of our social justice work, because they're all important. We have a comment by Sally, and I'm going to close with this. Sally said to the group that we do need humor, music, theater, poetry, and all the arts and all different ways of communication to shine the light on racism and reconcile differences. So for me personally, art and music is very, very important. And there have been movement by artists and musicians in which they took part in our social justice movements. I mean, we all know about We Shall Overcome by Pete Seeger, which became actually national anthem in the civil rights movement. We all know about Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan and Redemption Song by Bob Marley. So I thought today, instead of a poem, I'll close with a song, which I'm going to share on my screen. And you all, those of you who want to leave, please, you're welcome to leave because we are beyond our time. But thank you so much, Beth. I'm going
Thank
to
you.
play.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to, I went ahead and went to gallery view so I could see all of you. So I just want to say thank you so much. Deep bows, deep bows.
Thank
Thank you
you
for
for
having
being
me
here, and we hope to have you again soon. So I'm going
anytime.
to play Imagine by John Lennon, which is a very simple and impactful example of a song which was released during Vietnam War. And Lennon asked the listeners to imagine a utopia without any boundaries or borders or possessions. And the reason I play is because he says that I might be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And that's the message from this class, that we're not the only one. We're all dreamers, but we're not the only one. So here we go. Let me share my screen and then we will close. And those of you who need to leave, please feel free to.